I moved my family 800 miles for the traditional Latin Mass. And when we were looking at new areas to go, one of the criterion was the SSPX had to be one of the options. Now I'm not so sure. The SSPX, or the Society of St. Pius X, it's a traditionalist Catholic society that does exclusively the traditional Latin Mass. You know, my wife, who has her own channel, At a Catholic Wife, hi Dina, she's always been really supportive of the SSPX, more so than I think, because as the father and husband of this family, the spiritual leader of the family, I have to be a little more circumspect. I have to approach things a little more cautiously. As Don Corleone once said, women and children can be careless, but men cannot. You know, the easier thing for me to do would be to tell my wife, yeah, let's just go SSPX. Great. That's what you want. Let's do it. But my job is to make the hard decisions in the family. And if that means telling my wife, no, we can't, I got to make that decision. I mean, ultimately, I make the decisions for the family, but it's always in consultation with my wife. It's not, it's not that I just put my foot down and I don't want to hear anything about anything else. So I will often ask my wife her opinion on things. I've always respected the SSPX because, as a lot of people will say to this day, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have the traditional Latin Mass. It would have been gone. And I really think that Archbishop Lefebvre did the faithful a great service in doing what he did. So from day one, though, since Archbishop Lefebvre started the SSPX, there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of disruption, I think, in the church, because you have this pope saying one thing about the SSPX, this pope saying a different one, this bishop saying a different thing about the SSPX, and this other bishop. And it's like, as a husband and father, the spiritual leader of the family, I have to decide which side to come down on, or even pick a side. One thing that people seem to agree on in the church is that the SSPX, if you go to one of their masses, it's not a sin. It fulfills your Sunday obligation. But if you want to make a habit of going to an SSPX chapel, and let me be clear, we've never stepped foot in an SSPX chapel. I mean, we started out at a diocesan traditional Latin Mass. We now attend an FSSP parish, or the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, which is an offshoot of the SSPX. When the SSPX consecrated extra bishops without the okay from the Vatican, Archbishop Lefebvre and the new bishops, they were excommunicated. There was a whole big thing with that. I won't get into it on this video. But then the FSSP they broke away from the SSPX, saying, look, we want to be in full communion and in a regular status and all that stuff with the church, so we're going to start our own society. But it's still, the FSSP is still built around the traditional Latin Mass only. And that's where we go, to an FSSP parish. But in watching some SSPX Masses online and things like that, I will say that the homilies are spot on. Everything in the liturgy, spot on. I mean, they do it the right way, liturgy-wise and like homiletics. But there's been a couple things that have come up over the last few years that have kind of tweaked me a bit, and it made me unsure about the SSPX. I always gave them the benefit of the doubt, but lately, that benefit of the doubt is disappearing. At one point, Rome sent Bishop Athanasius Schneider to do a visitation with the SSPX so that he could report back and say, hey, are these guys schismatic or not? And he did his visitation and came back and said, no, they're not schismatic. They're canonically irregular, their status, but that it could fulfill a Catholic's Sunday obligation without a problem, without sin. When Traditionis Custodes came out, and we were going to our diocesan parish up in Tennessee, I saw the writing on the wall, as did my wife and many other people. And I remember thinking and actually going on record as saying, look, if we have to move and the SSPX is our only option, I'll go there and my conscience will be clear. Because Bishop Schneider and others have said, look, it's okay for the faithful to go to an SSPX Mass as long as they're not doing that with the intent to separate themselves from Rome. You can go. And I'll link below what the church has said about that. And now I'm at the point where I'm going to think twice before going to an SSPX chapel. And with these new consecrations coming in July, the SSPX is back in the news bigger than ever, I think. And there's a lot of stuff going on online and in just discussions among people at Mass every day. And as these discussions are taking place, I'm seeing a lot of SSPX people, not so much the clergy, but the faithful, they're going on the attack. And it's really starting to turn me off here, and I'll explain why. I mean, maybe you can help me understand this. What am I not getting here? The SSPX will be the first ones to tell you we're not schismatic. We pray for the Pope at every Mass, and we're right there with the papacy. We submit to the papacy and all this stuff. and I forget who it was, but somebody had written an article recently, and they pointed out it's not so much the Pope, like Pope Leo, that they have an affinity for and a submission to. It's more the concept of the papacy in general. And I think that's coming out more and more here. And the thing is, in the comment sections of videos, and I do jump into these things a lot, and I see the SSPXers, right away they start saying, well, look what Leo's done, and what about this, and what about that? And it's like they attack things that Leo has done to justify their position. It just doesn't seem to me that they want to be in full communion with the Vatican when they're picking apart things that they've done, and they run back on Vatican II, and they talk about how bad Vatican II was and all this other stuff. So it's like they're talking out of both sides of their mouth here. And I made a comment, I think it was on my wife's channel, when she did a video about the SSPX, and I said, look, if it comes down to it, with these consecrations happening in July, and the Pope comes out and says, okay, that's it, I've had it, the faithful are not permitted to go to an SSPX Mass anymore, I would submit to the Pope, and I would not go to an SSPX Mass. I said that, and boy, the vitriol that came flying from these SSPX people was unbelievable. I was called a coward because I was going to submit to the Pope. That's cowardly. I mean, I'm getting attacked more than anything, so I think it's the opposite of being cowardly. I could have just said, yeah, whatever the Pope says, I'm still going to go. But who in their right mind, what Catholic in good conscience is going to disregard basically an order from the Pope? It would be a lawful order. I don't understand how you can have the attitude where, forget the Pope, I'm going to go. That's not Catholic. And I know I'm going to get accused of being a Pope-splainer and all that stuff, but there's a big difference between what Pope Leo is doing and what Francis did. Pope Francis spoke a lot of heretical things, in my opinion. He was just, to me, he was a bitter, angry old man who wanted to punish traditional Catholics. I don't get that from Pope Leo. I don't know. The guy, I'm sure he's not perfect. He's made mistakes. So I'm not Pope-splaining for Pope Leo. I'm just saying he is the reigning Pope, and if he comes down with an edict, I have to follow it. And that's no different than if Pope Francis had said, you can't go to the SSPX. I would have followed what he said. One guy from the SSPX, I made that comment, and he said, well, okay, so if Pope Leo told you to go out and rob a liquor store, would you do that too? And it's like, you're talking about an affirmative order to go do something wrong, as opposed to don't do this, And to me, that was a really, really stupid argument to make. Just like my wife has to defer to what I say, I have to adhere to what the Pope says. I mean, I could end up being totally wrong in what I tell my family to do spiritually. And if that's the case, then that's on me. It's not on them. And if Pope Leo is wrong about something that he tells us we can or cannot do, then that's on him. But we're still listening to the reigning pontiff. So the sin's not on us. And one of the biggest reasons, though, that my attitude with the SSPX is changing, or has changed, is that they've attacked the FSSP, the order that runs my parish. And let me tell you something. The FSSP are some of the most amazing priests that I've ever come in contact. I've been a Catholic my whole life. NO, traditional Latin Mass. The FSSP is the most solid bunch of priests I've ever met. Their homilies are spot on. I mean, the reverence, the love of the Mass. I've gone to at least one of FSSP priests now for spiritual direction, and I got to say, it blew me away how great this priest is. And he's my pastor at our church. I have full faith that these guys are wanting to do nothing but the best thing possible for Christ and his church and the faithful. So when I see SSPX attacking the FSSP because what? They're not SSPX enough, not critical enough of the Pope, that's a big red flag for me. I think the FSSP has shown a lot of courage in that, they've swallowed some things that they weren't crazy about having to do here and there, but it was because they wanted to keep the traditional Latin Mass accessible, at least for the faithful. And that shows a lot of courage to me. I never, ever considered going this Sedevacantis route. And for those of you that don't know, Sedevacantism, it's a group of Catholics who have separated themselves from the church. They think that there has been no pope since, I think, 1958, some of them even longer than that. And I've never gone that route. And it always seemed to me that the SSPX was kind of in between Sedevacantism, regular church, you know what I'm saying? And the FSSP, though, has been that bridge. And I've been attacked by Sedevacantists on my channel too, saying, oh, you're not a real traditionalist, you're not a real traditional Catholic because you don't believe that we haven't had a pope in this many years. And I always say back to them, look, you don't own tradition. You don't. And that's where I'm headed with the SSPX, because I've gotten a lot of comments from SSPXers saying basically the same thing. Guys, you don't own tradition, okay? There are Novus Ordo Catholics out there who are more traditional than SSPXers, FSSP. You don't own it. And the FSSP, I think, really bridges that gap where, they're still loyal to Rome, but they give great homilies. They, are rock solid in their catechesis and everything else that harkens back to the earlier Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, the Mass of the Ages, but without being critical of Rome at every step. I mean, help me understand this. The SSPX, they claim to be loyal to the Pope, but they reject huge parts of Vatican II. And look, I'm not a big Vatican II guy, and I haven't read all the documents. I'm not a Vatican II wonk, okay? I couldn't tell you what every document of Vatican II says. I'm not happy with a lot of fruit from Vatican II, but you can't sit there and claim that you're loyal to the Pope and then reject a whole ecumenical council. The SSPX, they are the ones, they get into the weeds of Vatican II. And personally, and my wife is right on the same page with me, I don't care. I don't care about Vatican II, getting into the weeds of that and the nuances of it and the idiosyncrasies of it. I just want to go to the traditional Latin Mass. I want to worship as my ancestors did. That's it. And the FSSP gives that to us without fostering a sedevacantist attitude. Another huge red flag for me from the SSPX is when they have said that if there was a choice between going to the traditional Latin Mass or going to the Novus Ordo Mass, like if there wasn't a traditional Latin Mass available and only a Novus Ordo Mass, that you should stay home. No way. Huge red flag. I'm not doing that. And what's funny is there was an FSSP priest that we had talked to, not our pastor, but it was another FSSP priest. And we asked him that question. We kind of posed that to him, and he says, no, you still got to keep your Sunday obligation. And if you have to go, I mean, he wasn't crazy about it, but it was, if you have to go to an NO Mass, do that. Grin and bear it, but get through it, and you have to go. Big difference between that and SSPX telling you to stay home. To me, that's really dangerous. I mean, the SSPX is called the Novus Ordo poisonous. I mean, you can't get more of a sedevacantist or separatist viewpoint than that. And I think with this new thing coming up with the consecrations and all that, and the more of the arguments that are coming, I think the mask is kind of coming off the SSPX, and it's really turning me away from them, from even considering going. So my attitude so far, and it's not there yet completely, but it's moving that way, where if for some reason our FSSP traditional Latin Mass goes away, if say the FSSP is thrown out of this diocese that we're in, I'm going to go to an NO Mass before an SSPX chapel. I'm just going to, because I don't want to be seen as contributing to that kind of mindset. And you never know. I mean, I haven't heard a lot of SSPX homilies, but you never know what kind of things will creep in and then creep into your mind what they're saying from the AMBO. And don't get me wrong either. The people that go to the SSPX that we've come in contact with, especially on my wife's channel, she's been in contact with a lot of people that go to SSPX chapels. They are great people. They really are. They're very obviously devout Catholics who just want to worship Christ. And so I'm not trying to dump on them. I'm just saying the SSPX as a whole, though, it's not looking good. And, for me, and I'm going to say, as husbands and fathers that are out there, make up your own decision. Do your homework. Make your decision as far as what you think is best for your family. In our former diocese, when they lost the traditional Latin Mass out of all the diocesan parishes, they started looking for a lifeline. And I feel so bad for them. There are so many people that are hurting that didn't have the wherewithal to move like we did. And by the way, if you're looking to move for the traditional Latin Mass, I would highly recommend reaching out to Real Estate for Life. They were fantastic when we sold our home up in Tennessee, and then when we bought our home down here in Southwest Florida. They'll help you do both. And look, they're not a sponsor of mine. My wife does happen to be an affiliate for them, but and I'll put a link down to their website for you if you're so inclined. But boy, they were awesome. But anyway, the people up in our former diocese, they're hurting. They're hurting so bad, and they're reaching out, looking for a lifeline. What I'm hearing is the SSPX is considering moving into that area, which is great, But I would just caution them, just be careful. Again, watch that mindset. I mean, there's a lot of hurt feelings. There's a lot of pain. And sometimes people can take that and kind of apply that to the church as a whole. So again, if you're going to go to SSPX Chapel, just don't do it with that mindset that you're separating from Rome or that you're punishing Rome or something like that. Our goal should be to be united to Christ through his one true church, through his vicar on earth, not to some order of priests. I mean, we're not Protestants. We're not just going to set up our own places of worship willy-nilly. You have a problem with this one preacher and what he says, well, you're going to go and start a new one or go to another. We're not Protestants. We are Catholics, and we need to start acting like it. I pray every day that this rift between the Sedevacantists, the SSPX, Novus Ordo, that this rift is healed. And if Pope Leo really wants to do something for the church, I think if he works on that and he can somehow bring that together, he will be a great pope. I appreciate you sticking with me so far. If you liked anything that I said, hit the like button. Consider subscribing. Thank you so much. God bless. And as always, Padre Pio, Order Pro Nobis. St. Pius X, Order Pro Nobis.